Welcome everybody to this Meet the Researchers event of the CIS. The Meet the Researchers talks have been designed so that our research staff can present some of the work they're doing at the moment and also get some feedback from interested people. So tonight it's my pleasure to welcome Ben Herscovitch to do his talk on language policy in the Asian century. Before joining CIS, Benjamin was a policy graduate at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, where he served on the Pakistan desk and worked on the department's public diplomacy programs. He also recently finished a PhD thesis that advances a liberal theory of federalism. Benjamin's academic research spans philosophy, political theory and political science, and he has published in all these disciplines. At CIS, he's working on social policy issues, including social mobility. He's just completed a large manuscript on that, and that's going through the editorial stages. And then, to fill in time, he decided to work on another paper, which is the subject of tonight's talk. And he also continues to explore his interests in regional foreign policy. So it's my pleasure to welcome Benjamin to the stage. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you for the introduction, Greg, and thank you all for being here this evening on this very bleak July night. We read daily stories about decline in Europe and North America and Asia's surging economic growth and expanding political and military footprint. These changes are rapid and profound and have led to a debate about Australia's place in the Asian century. Part of this debate has centered on Australia's Asia literacy. Do enough Australians speak Asian languages? Do Australians have the cultural awareness to effectively engage with Asia? In short, does Australia have the necessary skills to navigate the Asian century? Obviously, being able to speak Asian languages is crucial in this Asia literacy, but that is not enough. As the questions being asked about Australia's Asia literacy make clear, it also concerns the extent of familiarity with Asian cultures. This discussion about Australia's Asia literacy has been dominated by calls to, as the Prime Minister Julia Gillard said in May, broaden and deepen Australia's Asia-relevant capabilities across the whole of Australian society. Consistent with this, the Coalition has proposed new language education programs reportedly worth $1 billion, with the goal of having 40% of Year 12 students studying a language other than English. At the same time, the shape paper of the new Australian curriculum, which is currently undergoing national consultation, was written on the assumption that all Australian students will learn a language other than English in primary and secondary school. The debate about Australia's Asia literacy is timely and important. It is no exaggeration to say that whether Australia can successfully do business and conduct diplomacy with Asia will in large part determine our fate. However, the debate has not been evidence-based, and the resulting policy proposals have therefore been out of step with the demographics of language policy. So as to get a sense of where I'll be taking the argument this evening, here is the overall structure of my presentation. I will firstly frame the debate about Australia's Asia literacy by sketching the rise of Asia. Secondly, give an overview of the recommendations and policy proposals made in the debate. Thirdly, detail the current status of languages other than English in Australian schools. Fourthly, examine Australia's Asian languages literacy. And fifthly and finally, assess the extent of Australia's Asian cultural literacy. The overall argument that I want to make this evening is that Australia's multicultural composition means that we already have all of the Asia literacy, both cultural and linguistic, we need. New government programs to improve Asia literacy are not necessary because Australia's diverse population already speaks the languages of Asia and understands Asian cultures. The Asian century is not just a pithy turn of phrase dreamt up by Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet bureaucrats. Here we see that China had larger car sales than the United States in 2010 and will have a larger GDP than the United States in just 6 years. For some, this is a source of terror. For others, it is heartening, irrespective of one's response to these striking trends, the point is that the changes are very big and very real. The rise of Asia is nothing less than a seismic geostrategic shift in world politics. After approximately 500 years of first European and then American economic and military preeminence, power is moving back to Asian capitals and centers of commerce. The rise of Asia is much more than the rise of China. In 2050, not only will the Chinese economy be twice the size of America's, but the Indian economy will also be the world's largest. By this time, Indonesia will have the world's fourth largest economy. With wealth comes the means to acquire military power. Now the world's second largest defense spender, China's defense spending will equal that of the United States by 2025. India is now the world's biggest arms importer, and this year expanded its defense budget by 17%. In economic and military terms, the great powers of Asia will overtake even the greatest North Atlantic powers in a matter of mere decades. The stakes are particularly high for Australia. Australia's economic connections and geographic proximity to Asia mean that managing relations with Asia's ascendant powers will be the key to ensuring both prosperity and security in the Asian century. Australia is increasingly economically reliant on Asian economies. The top 5 destinations for Australian exports in order of importance are China, Japan, South Korea, India, and Taiwan. These economic ties are set to deepen. Australia is currently negotiating free trade agreements with China, Japan, South Korea, India, and Indonesia. If we bring all of these points together, it becomes clear that Australia sits on the doorstep of Asia's rising military giants and will find itself in the engine room of the economic forces driving the Asian century. Engaging with Asia is therefore something that Australia simply cannot afford to get wrong. The dramatic scale and pace of the rise of Asia has produced what we might call Asia literacy alarm. Peter Harcher, political and international editor of the Sydney Morning Herald, wrote in May that Australia has coasted on the historical coincidence that 2 consecutive dominant powers, Imperial Britain and superpower America, spoke English, but history has turned. The seemingly inexorable rise of Asia forces Australian policymakers to confront the question of whether Australia is adequately prepared for a world in which the dominant powers are not part of the Anglosphere. That just refers to those countries where English is the first language of the majority. The conventional wisdom in this debate is that Australians lack the skills necessary for success in the Asian century. Greg Sheridan, the foreign editor of The Australian, recently bemoaned what he called the catastrophic decline in Asia literacy in Australia. Evidence often cited by Asian languages alarmists is the fact that 2011 saw the lowest proportion ever of New South Wales final year students enrolled in a second language. Of 72,391 HSC students, only 1,376, or 1.9%, studied Japanese. 1,091, or 1.5%, studied Chinese. 232, or 0.3%, studied Indonesian, and a mere 42, or just 0.05%, studied Hindi. Given what is the obvious importance of countries like Japan, China, Indonesia, and India to Australia's prosperity and security, numbers like these have understandably caused concern. The consequence of this lackluster Asia literacy is said to be the need for a comprehensive government response to ensure that more Australian students learn Asian languages and gain familiarity with Asian cultures. Typical of this, Tim Lindsay, director of the Asian Law Centre at the University of Melbourne, has argued that if Australia is to be able to engage effectively with Asia in the years ahead, a very large investment by the Commonwealth in Asian studies in schools is urgently required. This logic has led commentators, Asian studies academics, and educators to push for more resources to teach more students Asian languages for longer periods of time. In 2009, now executive director of the Low Institute, Michael Wesley, proposed an ambitious and detailed 30-year program that would have cost $11.3 billion and involved the establishment of a National Asian Languages Institute and the teaching of Asian languages at all educational levels. Following the lead of academics and commentators like Sheridan and Lindsay, both sides of politics have pledged to improve Australia's Asia literacy in both its cultural and linguistic forms. The Minister for School Education, Early Childhood and Youth, Peter Garrett, said in April that the more children learn an Asian language, the better equipped they will be, and the better equipped Australia will be to have a sustainable economy in the 21st century. The Coalition shares this commitment to improving Australia's Asia literacy. In November 2011, the Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs, Julie Bishop, even went so far as to suggest that learning an Asian language should be mandatory. The knee-jerk response that large-scale government programs are required is a product of the debate about Asia literacy not being evidence-based. Commentary from academics and politicians alike often overlooks both the extent of the existing language education programs in states and territories, as well as the demographics of language education policy. Owing to the dramatic rise of Asia, it is entirely understandable that this response would be forthcoming. But the overarching claim that I want to make is that it really is an overreaction. First, to the existing language education programs in states and territories. Australia's federal system of government means that education policy is in the jurisdiction of the states and territories. As a result, the place of languages other than English in curricula varies across the country. Here we see a breakdown of the status of languages other than English in general, and Asian languages in particular, in Australian schools. Learning a language other than English is compulsory in New South Wales, Victoria, the Australian Capital Territory, and Queensland, and optional in South Australia, Western Australia, Tasmania, and the Northern Territory. The upshot of all of this is that learning a language other than English is compulsory in the most populous states and territories, with over 75% of Australia's population. And languages other than English are often in the remaining states and territories. Although Asian languages are not taught in every school where a language other than English is offered, key Asian languages, including Chinese, Indonesian, and Japanese, are offered in all states and territories. What this means is that the shrill tone of the debate is misleading. Australia already has significant language programs in place, and these language programs include Asian languages. The likely response to this kind of argument will be that Australia's language education programs lag far behind their European and Asian counterparts. This is no doubt true. For example, the goal of EU language policy is a Europe in which everyone can speak at least 2 languages on top of their own mother tongue. This means that Europe is far ahead when it comes to teaching languages other than the first language than Australia, where even in the states where it is compulsory, languages other than English are only compulsory for a relatively short period of time. There is, nonetheless, a really good reason for this discrepancy. Australia has a natural advantage over most European and Asian countries because our national language is the global lingua franca. English is the world's preeminent common language, and the international language of specialized fields like academia, air traffic control, and diplomacy. English is even reportedly the common language of the global jihad, serving as a means of communication between Arabic-speaking jihadists and non-Arabic-speaking jihadists. There are approximately 2 billion English speakers worldwide, and it is predicted that by 2050, half of the world's population will be proficient in English. English is also widespread in our region. This is particularly relevant given that the debate concerns Australia's Asia literacy. English is an Asian language both in a demographic and an official sense. Asia has approximately 800 million English speakers, far more English speakers than the entire Anglosphere. And English is an official language in major Asian economic and military powers like India and dynamic global commercial hubs like Singapore. A modest approach to teaching languages other than English therefore seems appropriate for a country like Australia. In addition to the extent of the existing Asian languages teaching in Australian schools and the growing English literacy in Asia and the rest of the world, there is the ignored demographic dimension of Australia's language education policies. This will be the focus of the remainder of my presentation this evening. Australia's multicultural composition in effect means that we have extensive and growing Asia literacy, both in terms of languages spoken and cultural awareness. Before committing potentially billions of dollars of public funds, the commentators, academics, and politicians in favor of greater Asia literacy must explain why new Asian languages education programs are necessary in light of what you might call this ready-made Asia literacy. Considering that no one in the debate has yet explored in detail what Australia's multicultural composition means for language education policies, one suspects that such explanations will not be forthcoming. In that scenario, the most plausible conclusion is that no reforms are necessary to improve Australia's Asia literacy. This will be the key conclusion that I'll be reaching this evening, that given all of this ready-made Asia literacy in Australia's community, there is no need for a government attempt to increase the pool of Asia literacy. In saying that, it is really important to stress that this is by no means a defense of monolingualism or Asia illiteracy. The rise of Asia means that valuable opportunities are likely to be associated with speaking Asian languages. It is therefore important that all Australian students have the option of learning Asian languages. At the same time though, and this is the crucial point, although bi- or multilingualism might be advantageous, as a country with ready-made Asia literacy, Australia's future in the Asian century looks bright. Now we'll move on to the concrete demographics of Australia's Asia literacy. In 2006, about 2 million Australians spoke Asian languages at home, which equated to approximately 10% of the population. By way of clarification, the data stops at 2006 in this graph because the release of the 2011 census data was only partial. However, as we'll see later, there are some precise breakdowns that you can get in terms of some key Asian languages like Mandarin and Cantonese. In any case, given that these numbers date from the 2006 census, and Australia's immigration program is increasingly sourcing immigrants from Asia, the pool of Australia's human capital when it comes to Asian languages literacy is now probably even larger than the numbers suggested by this graph. This is confirmed by recently released portions of 2011 census data showing that the leading birthplace of immigrants who arrived in Australia since 2006 with India with 13.1%. This number represents a 100% increase on the 2006 census. During the same period, the number of immigrants born in China increased by 54%, and the number from the Philippines increased by 42%. If we break these numbers down, we find that important Asian languages were very well represented within the overall number of speakers of Asian languages in the 2006 census. There were approximately 500,000 people who spoke Chinese languages at home, most notably Mandarin and Cantonese. This in effect means that 500,000 Australians have the language skills to engage with Australia's most important trading partner and the country that will soon have the world's largest economy and military expenditure. Indian languages, including Hindi and Tamil, had over 100,000 speakers in total, while there were approximately 190,000 Vietnamese speakers, 90,000 Tagalog speakers, 55,000 Korean speakers, 40,000 Indonesian speakers, and 35,000 Japanese speakers. Preliminary results from the 2011 census show that Australia's Asian languages literacy continues to grow. In 2011, Mandarin had 336,410 speakers at home, while Cantonese had 263,673. This represents a 52.5% and 7.8% increase respectively on the 2006 numbers. Although detailed data on other Asian languages from the 2011 census is not yet available, rises in the number of immigrants from Asian countries suggest that the number of speakers of other Asian languages will have also increased. Indicative of this, the number of people who spoke Punjabi at home reportedly rose by over 200%. The story that we have here is obviously striking enough. However, it is even more encouraging than it might initially appear. Although not everyone who speaks an Asian language at home will speak it well, the data that we have looked at probably still underestimates the number of Australians who speak Asian languages. The census data measures the number of people who speak languages at home, and will therefore not include the speakers of Asian languages who do not have the opportunity to speak them at home. Even if we ignore potential underreporting, though, it is clear that Australia has a large store of Asian literacy that continues to grow year on year. By measuring the number of people who speak Asian languages at home, the census data is also a good indicator of Asian cultural literacy. Although the connection will not hold in all cases, there is a good chance that someone who speaks an Asian language at home will have some kind of familial connection with the language, and as a result, will have some level of cultural literacy. This large store of Asian cultural literacy is not just a potential asset to those Australians with existing familial connections to Asian cultures. Multicultural Australia's diverse composition also means that Asian cultural literacy is being acquired by wide sections of Australian society without the government enacting a policy response of any kind. In Australia's multicultural society, there is a high degree of interaction between different cultural groups in a variety of contexts. Evidence of this can be found in Australia's high rates of intermarriage. The 2006 census data shows that the spouses were of different ancestries in 30% of all couples, and the rate of intermarriage has been increasing with each successive generation regardless of ethnic background. Added to this, 30% of all marriages that took place in Australia in 2007 were between people born in different countries. Australia also has comparably low levels of residential segregation. Recent research shows that Australians are more likely to be living in mixed neighbourhoods than their British, Canadian, and in particular, American counterparts. In a healthy multicultural society like Australia's, with high levels of interaction between cultural groups in social, familial, educational, residential, and professional contexts, cultural literacy acquisition is inevitable. Without attending classes or purposefully engaging with Asian cultures, Australians are slowly acquiring Asian cultural literacy. Admittedly, this kind of cultural literacy acquisition might be slow and incomplete. Living alongside or even marrying someone from a different cultural group may only lead to a superficial understanding of another culture, and even that might take a long time to acquire. The potentially slow rate of cultural acquisition is, however, no reason for concern. Added to the fact that deep Asian cultural literacy will not be required from the vast majority of Australians, Asia's multicultural composition means that many Australians already have an understanding of Asian cultures. To conclude, Australia's multicultural composition makes clear that Australia will prosper in the Asian century because it already speaks the languages of Asia and has widespread Asian cultural literacy. The low levels of Asian languages learning in Australian schools do not require a large-scale government response. Australia will be well endowed when it comes to Asia literacy if levels of Asian languages learning remain static or even fall. There is no question that the scale and pace of the global economic and military rebalancing from the North Atlantic to Asia could barely be more dramatic. However, contrary to what commentators, academics, and politicians would have us believe, this development does not require a change in language education policies. As an English-speaking country in a world that speaks English, and with a multicultural society that is naturally Asia literate, Australia is well placed to prosper in the Asian century. Thank you all very much for your time, and the floor is now open for questions.